What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of At a Glance, a series in which I give you an appetizer sampler glimpse into a particular chapter in 40k. And the goal behind it is to help you decide if you want to go ahead and look further into the Force on your own, or maybe even start collecting that Force as well. So up on the chopping block by viewer request is a Blood Angels Successor chapter. Because it was left open-ended, I chose my favorite of the Successors ultimately, and that is the Lamenters Space Marine chapter. Now, the Lamenters Space Marine chapter is an acquired taste chapter through and through. You have to like their fluff, and you have to like the color scheme that is the Lamenters color scheme ultimately to really want to collect them. Some forces, the color scheme might be an acquired taste only, and in some forces the fluff might be an acquired taste only. And in some forces there's no real acquired tasteness to it. As long as you have an interest, you would like to collect them. But the Lamenters, everything's an acquired taste basically with them. This chapter also kind of gets the short end of the stick from GW. For example, they're not mentioned in the current Blood Angels Codex at all. They were in the previous one, but not in the current one, which is a bit unfortunate. You could say it kind of makes sense for the fluff, but I say if it's an official chapter that is a successor of the Blood Angels, it should be mentioned, because they're not destroyed. They're thought to be close to it. They're kind of ragtag right now, but they are surviving. So they're an official chapter that's not destroyed. This should be mentioned. That's my thought process. But anyway, the Lamenters Space Marine chapter is a product of the 21st founding, which is the Cursed founding. And the Cursed founding is called such because it did not go well at all. The Genitors were doing gene seed experimentation to try and create super Space Marines, and it failed horribly. So a lot of the official chapters were destroyed or fell to chaos. The ones that survived and stayed loyal were viewed with a great deal of suspicion because of what happened with the Cursed founding, and why are they still loyal? What are they truly corrupted by, if anything at all? What is their curse? Or what is their flaw? Something these chapters couldn't have made it out unscathed is the idea. And when we look at the chapters, they basically don't. They exist and they're loyal, but there's definitely some quirks or some curse going on with them. And the Lamenters are no different. The Lamenters, being a Blood Angel Successor chapter, means they are a Blood Angel gene seed, and with that, they should be afflicted by the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. And at the very beginning, at the start of the chapter's existence, it seems like they were not. It seems like they were hope for the Blood Angels overall, because they did not seem afflicted by the Red Thirst or the Black Rage. They did not seem to have any standing death company at all. They did not seem to be suffering from what the Blood Angels and their successors suffer from. So they seemed like something hopeful at the beginning. And that is not the case ultimately, but that's how it seemed. However, they also had this very dark, melancholy nature, the Lamenters, and like this palpable aura or feeling of grief and misery and despair. And not that the chapter gives into that, but that's how it feels, so their enemies are kind of gripped with this overwhelming feeling of grief, misery, and despair. And it kind of gives the heebie-jeebies, you could say, to other Imperial forces. So, as the chapter grew older, this dark melancholy at the core of the chapter's nature grew more pronounced, and that palpable aura of grief and the idea of misery and despair and all that being kind of attributed to them kind of grew with it. And this didn't help the Imperium warm up to the Lamenters at all. There was already suspicion for them for being from the Cursed founding, and having these quirks, these flaws you could say, only furthered that shunning. And if that was it, it wouldn't be so much of an acquired taste. But the Lamenters have like ultimate bad luck syndrome, essentially. Nothing really ever goes their way. They were on the wrong side of the Bedavor, for example, but they survived that and were able to prove their loyalty in the Penance Crusade, which is what they're currently on. They were brought to the brink of annihilation several times. They were lost in the warp after being brought to the brink of annihilation, roughly around 2 or so companies strong. Then they got lost in the warp while trying to rebuild. Survived that by fighting the entire time. Got even more suspicion brought on them because of that. And this just kind of gets perpetually, not worse, but it continues in perpetuity, I guess is the way you'd say that. I don't know words. But their entire history of their fluff and their background is chock full of events like this. And it's not that they lose battles left and right. That's not the case at all. They are Space Marines. They have Space Marine equipment, Space Marine training. They're a Blood Angels descent, so they have that type of capability in combat. That's their aggressive assault preference. That's what they are good at, and that's what they do well at. But their victories are kind of robbed from them. Instead of having the glory that other chapters would have with a victory, it kind of becomes a hollow, ashen victory for them, because events kind of happen with that victory that makes it feel almost meaningless. Like, what was the point of even doing it, almost? And there's a lot of examples, because they were written about in a Forgel book for the Badab War, and they do have some decent amount written on them, even though they get the short end of the stick in terms of representation. There is some decent stuff written on them, so I'm not going to go into specifics because I'll be bogged down and I'll be here all day. But there is more than you might suspect written for the Lamenters, and none of it really ever has just and everything went well. Usually there's some type of hiccup in the plan, or some type of problem that comes up, and this has led to suspicion even more, and led to forces not wanting to really fight alongside the Lamenters because they don't want to deal with all that bad luck. So further getting them shunned. The Badab War happens. That's not good for them either. The Penance Crusade they undertake after the fact leads them to run smack dab into High Fleet Kraken, and now they're currently where the fluff is frozen timeline wise, because the 40k fluff is essentially frozen at a certain point in the timeline, is with the Lamenters in a run and gun action along with other Imperial forces against High Fleet Kraken, and kind of as a ragtag force doing it. So on top of all of that, they're also not immune to the Red Thirst and the Black Rage like previously thought. It actually is afflicting the chapter. Not to the same degree that it afflicts the Blood Angels and other chapters, but they are afflicted by it nonetheless. So that control and that immunity, or whatever you want to call it, that was thought to be with the Lamenters and was a good deal of their fluff for a long time, is actually not true, because they're afflicted by it now. So it's like rubbing salt in the wound or kicking them while they're down. They have all of this stuff to deal with, and the flaw of the Blood Angels gene seed is there as well. So the reason why I like their fluff is not because there's a whole bunch of bad stuff going on, but because through it all they remain true to the Space Marine ideology. They never once tried to invoke the powers of chaos to get them out of it. They never once really gave in to their woe is me type of stuff. They've always kind of continued on and just kept on keeping on, basically. And there's that kind of heroic nugget in there, which is that I like. But you have to sift through it to see it. But with other chapters on the surface, you have to sift through all of the problems that the Lamenters deal with to see the heroic nature at their core, even underneath their dark melancholy nature. So if you're a bit of a pessimist, though, you could say they just do this because they're cursed to always be on the short end of the stick. But I think it's more of a heroic thing that they continue on like this. So that's why I like them. But with that, their color scheme is a bit of an acquired taste thing as well. The color scheme is yellow. Yellow armor, kind of a mustardy yellow, but yellow. If you do yellow, you're basically good. Just don't do a bright or neon yellow. Do a regular yellow and you're good. With black squad markings, gold chest emblem and trimming when they do have trimmings, and that wouldn't be that bad. Yellow is a bit of an acquired taste. Yellow is not the most common, or it's not one of the more common colors used for Space Marine chapters, and it's a bit difficult to paint, but that's not the biggest of deals. On top of that, what just further adds to that is their chapter symbol, which is a bleeding heart in a circular white background that's outlined in black, and that's set on top of a black and white checkered pattern, and that spans the entirety of their shoulder pad. So for vehicles and stuff, you could get away with doing stuff with it. It wouldn't be that bad, but because it spans the entire shoulder pad, power armor or Terminator armor wise, you don't really have a good way of making a decal for that to try and help you out, and there's no official decal for them. So freehanding it is really difficult. I can't freehand that, and I'm sure it's difficult for a lot of people to do it. And if you're new to collecting miniature wargaming stuff and painting up these models, you're going to find that really out of your league potentially. So that is what really makes it an acquired taste color scheme, in my opinion, because you have to like the chapter enough to want to pursue that difficult chapter symbol. Luckily, there are 3D sculpted or 3D printed shoulder pads out there, and that's the only reason why I did a test model, because they were able to find that. But before that was a thing, I would never have considered trying to actually freehand that symbol because it's too difficult for me. So that's their color scheme. Their Death Company is the same color as the Blood Angels Death Company. It's the traditional black armor with red trimming and all that, but they still have that annoying chapter symbol to take care of there as well. Even though they're not mentioned in the Codex, the Blood Angels Codex is the way to go with them. That's how they fight. They're very much a Blood Angels successor in terms of combat doctrine. So that would be the Codex in question. I personally wouldn't feel Death Company just because, yeah, they're afflicted by it, but I don't think it's necessary to have it in your force. Also, because 3D sculpted, 3D printed, I always do that, shoulder pads are a bit of a premium item to get. I'm not going to make a Death Company and therefore have to put it there. I'd rather make regular Lamenters personally. But as far as the Codex goes, this is going to be the Blood Angels Codex. Now keep in mind they are a ragtag force right now. They're under strength. Their equipment, they don't have a full armory basically anymore. So certain things like Terminator armor are really cherished and few and far between. So does that mean you go with the Terminator squad? Well, ultimately, if that's what you like, yes, go for it. But just keep in mind that they're not going to have 3 squads worth of it or anything like that. Like a minimum size squad worth is basically what I would recommend doing at most. But you collect it how you want to collect it. Just if you keep the ragtag nature in mind, then you can kind of build with that theme and just maybe no Bile Predators or just one, maybe no Dreadnoughts or whatever the case is. So just something to keep in mind. Forge World has given them a special character for their chapter master. There's no model for it, just rules. Equipment wise, it's very similar to Dante, only there's no jump pack. He's on foot. But for casual pickup games or whatever, if you want to run the Forge World special character, fine. You're doing a fun casual game, no big deal. But if you're going to be playing in leagues, events, campaigns, or tournaments, more often than not, they just don't utilize anything Forge World to make it easy for everybody. And in that case, if you want your chapter master to be represented with a chapter master stat line, I recommend Counts as Dante. It's going to work well enough, and if you want to be a little slick, you can magnetize the backpack, so you can take a jump pack off and put a regular backpack on if you're going to do a fun game with the Forge World rules. But I recommend just doing accounts as Dante with a regular 40k list built from the Blood Angels Codex, and that's it. It's just easier if that's how you want to represent your, if you even want to represent the chapter master at all. So with that said, kit-wise, there's nothing specific for the Lamenters out there, except if you look at some third-party stuff. If you do a little bit of searching on the internet for 3D printed shoulder pads for the Lamenters, you'll find that. But outside of that, there's nothing specifically for the Lamenters. Any of the generic 40k, obviously, Space Marine bits from GW or Forge World will work just fine. The Blood Angels Tactical Squad has a lot of nice bits that can work for the Lamenters. Obviously, anything with the sculpted symbol will not work because that's the Blood Angel symbol, but the other stuff will work nicely. I say, the blood drops and stuff can work on the Lamenters just as well. So you have that to keep in mind and consider. But really pretty easy. Anything generic Space Marine wise will work for the Lamenters. Again, if you want to keep that ragtag thing in mind, maybe not quite as much ornateness going on as you would have perhaps with the Blood Angels themselves or something like that. But again, anything will work just fine. That's a Space Marine generic bit or kit. So with that said, that's really it for the Lamenters. I really like them. It's a bit more of an acquired taste than a lot of other chapters are, and I would really like to see the fluff be developed more so for them in the future. But that's it. Thanks for sticking through it. If you have any questions, comments, or requests, leave them in the comment section, and until next time, take it easy.